If you're looking for a video on how to build custom cabinets and you don't have $50,000 worth of tools, then check out this video. In this video, I'm going to walk you through step by step on how we're building this current set of cabinets, what type of materials we used, how much they cost, pros and cons to using different techniques, and give you all a lot of tips and tricks on how to build your cabinets fast and efficient. And as a bonus, since there is a lot of experts on social media that might lead you to believe there's only one way to do something, we're going to go over why that's not the case. So that being said, let's get into it. So this next set of video clips are going to be us building a base cabinet. For your standard base cabinets, they're generally going to be about 24 inches deep. So we're going to rip these pieces to 23¼ inches because our face frames will be about 3/4 inch. As you can see, these saws are just your run-of-the-mill job site tools, nothing super fancy. Now your heights for your standard base cabinets are usually 36 inches with the countertop. We are cutting these at 35. This plywood is a maple B2 grade veneer core 3/4 inch, and it runs about $100 a sheet in my area. And now for constructing the box, and this is where all the experts like to chime in. My advice is if you're going to have a traditional toe kick, go ahead and cut that out. It's just going to make it a lot easier before you put the panels together. Now there are a lot of ways to put boxes together, and there are different reasons for using different techniques. Right here we're using a Titebond 3 Ultimate Wood Glue and 18 gauge trim nails to put these boxes together. So a few things to note here. One, wood glue is a lot stronger than you probably think it is. Do you have to use it? No, but I like to. I'm using trim nails to tack everything together. This is going to give me the ability to shift any of the panels around if for some reason the box got out of square before I screw it in. And let's be honest, that can happen to anybody. As I said in the beginning of the video, this is a fast, efficient way to build cabinet boxes, and they will be very strong once it's done. Now, this is not the only way to build boxes. There are other techniques. Some may argue that you need to rabbet your back panels or that you need to dado your side panels. And yes, this is a strong, clean, effective method, but it does take longer to do it. A couple of things that they don't mention when they talk about that is when you're doing a project, you always have to take in consideration time and budget. If you have all the time and money in the world, sure, then you can use the most extensive build methods with the most expensive materials. Now that's from a financial standpoint. Let's talk about aesthetics. If you are painting the cabinets on the outside and inside, there are things you can do that you wouldn't be able to do if you weren't doing that. If you are staining or clear coating the cabinets, then you have to be mindful of the nails and screws that you're putting in the box because you will see them. For example, if you decide you want to screw the side panels together, then you have to make sure it's either going to be up against a wall or you're going to have to build a side panel to cover those screw holes. If the sides of the boxes are going to show and for some reason it's not in the budget to build a bunch of end panels, then using the dado, rabbeting, glue/clamp up technique would be a good choice in this example. For our toe kick board here, we used the same plywood as for the box, and we ripped it at about 3¼ inches. Just a quick side note, as you're putting your boxes together, take a damp rag and just make sure you're wiping up any excess glue that might be running. For these cabinets in particular, we are painting the outside and insides, and these will be face frame cabinets with 1/2 inch overlays. One thing that you have to consider when you're building your cabinet box and designing your face frames is you have to ask yourself, will the doors or drawers be obstructed by anything? So when you go to open the door, is it going to hit anything? If I pull the drawer open, is it going to hit another drawer that's next to it? And that will determine how big your face frames are going to be. On this particular cabinet box, we're using a 1½ inch poplar all the way around and a 2 inch to divide the door and drawers. And since we're using a 1/2 inch overlay on our doors and drawers, this will give us a 1 inch reveal all the way around, which will also give us a nice uniform look. Poplar is a popular choice. no pun intended, for face frames and doors and drawers. It is a budget-friendly material. It paints fairly well. I do generally, however, prefer maple, as it's a harder, more durable material and it paints really well. But again, you have to keep in mind the budget, and sometimes maple's not in it. Later on in the video, when we're building our upper cabinets, I go into a lot of detail on how we build our face frames. For the toe kicks, you've got a few different options here. Some people opt to build the base separate from the box itself. They find it easier on install. You can do a traditional toe kick, which is where you just pre-cut your panels. And then this one right here, I actually decided to do at a 45 degree. I just like the way these look. So now we're going to move on to our next set of videos, and this will be our upper cabinets. Your standard cabinet boxes are going to be about 12 inches deep. If you want to maximize the material, we're going to rip these at 11 7/8. So that's basically going to make our cabinets about 12 3/4 inches deep with the face frames. Now, one thing I didn't go over when we were doing the lower cabinets is your back panel. I've done another video of how to build cabinets where we used a 1/4 inch panel for our back panels. You don't have to use that. Again, there are pros and cons to using both. 1/4 inch panels are going to make the box much lighter. So if it is a really big box and you're installing by yourself, it may be better for you to use a 1/4 inch panel. Material-wise, it'll also be cheaper, but keep in mind that even though you're going to spend less in materials, you are going to spend more time and labor to build the boxes properly. You're going to have to do your dado cuts in your side panels for the 1/4 inch panel, and you're going to have to cut some stretchers to have something to screw into, because obviously a 1/4 inch panel is not going to hold up a box. So with your lower cabinets, there generally is a standard height for those, but for your uppers, there really isn't a true standard. It really depends on your space, how tall your ceilings are, the look you're going for. But I would say your standard upper box is going to range usually between 32 to 42 inches tall. That's what I've seen a lot of. These cabinets here are going to be a single upper box. We're cutting these at 42 inches tall. These are going to be in a 9-foot ceiling, so the top of the boxes will be about a foot from the ceiling. Here we are drilling the holes for our adjustable shelves. I'm using a Craig jig that I bought off of Amazon. I don't know if there's a lot more different size options for these holes, but I do know that your general size is 5 and 6 millimeters. I'm sure they make better jigs than this, but since this video is based around not having the best of tools, this is a great option. I think it was 30, 35 bucks. One mistake I've made in the past when using this jig is that the pin that holds it in place while you're drilling the other holes is two different size ends. So the smaller end size is what you're supposed to use to hold it in place, but I have noticed when you're doing long runs of holes that it will shift just enough to where by the time you get to the end, your hole might end up being off a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch than the holes next to it, which is obviously a huge problem when you go to put your shelves in because they're not going to sit right. So to combat that, I actually flip the pin over and I use the other end. It's a very snug fit. It's a little difficult to get it in and out, but it does keep that from moving at all. So by the time you get to the end of the row, all your holes are exactly where they're supposed to be. Now, if this has or does end up happening to you, one way around this, because a lot of times you don't know until the cabinet is finished that your shelves aren't perfectly aligned, you can rip a 1/4 inch panel and then glue that in and then re-drill your holes. Also, you can drill your holes after the box is put together, but I prefer to drill them before. It's just a lot easier and you're going to be more accurate that way. Constructing these boxes are going to be basically the same as what we did for the bottom. We're going to glue the panels and use our trim nails to tack everything together. In a perfect world, all your pieces will be cut dead on, but let's be realistic, that's not always the case. So before I put my glue on, I'll usually do what I call a dry fit. I'll set it in to make sure everything is lined up. Once I know it's good, then I'll put my glue on and tack it together. Here's a perfect example of me dry fitting this. My center panel I had pre-cut, but it was a little bit tighter than I wanted, so I shaved about a 1/16 of an inch of it off. But a lot of times when I have a center panel, I'll tack it in with a couple of trim nails, and then I'll use my tape measure just to make sure that it's all spaced perfectly. You don't want to get that really set in there, and then when you go to put your shelves in, realize that the shelf was not perfectly square or one side was off just a little bit. I didn't get a clip of this when I was doing my lower boxes, so I wanted to make sure that I got to show you all this when I was doing the upper box. But after you glue everything and tack it together, here we're coming back, pre-drilling all of our holes and screwing our boxes together. Now we're going to move on to the face frames for our upper boxes. We didn't go into a lot of detail on how you build your face frames for the lower boxes, so we'll talk more about that here. For constructing the face frames, you're going to need a pocket hole jig, and since we're using poplar as our face frames and they're 3/4 inches thick, we're going to be using 1 1/4 inch coarse thread screws. If you're using a much harder wood like maple or oak, you're going to want a fine thread screw. We're also going to be using the same glue as we did for the box, which is the Titebond 3 Ultimate Wood Glue. And then we're going to use our clamps. This is going to keep those face frames held together while you're putting your screws in and not let them shift around. I've gotten a lot of questions on how to decide the width of your face frames. There's a couple things you need to keep in mind when deciding that. One would be, like we talked about when we were discussing the lower cabinets, is there going to be anything obstructing the cabinet doors? For instance, if this was a corner cabinet, you have to make sure that when you go to open that door that it's not going to rub the door next to it. So you may have to go a little bit wider on your face frame to move that out. The other thing to keep in mind is that if this upper cabinet box is trying to mimic the lower cabinet, you might want the doors to all align with each other. So from an aesthetic standpoint, it's just going to look a lot cleaner. For these specific boxes, our verticals are 1 1/2 inch, which is the same as we did with the lower boxes. We do have a couple of boxes that are going to somewhat mimic the lower ones, so we wanted those to match. As far as our horizontal pieces, our bottom one, we went with 2 1/4, and our top one, we went with 2 1/2. The reason I go a little bit bigger on the top one is that I like to use crown around the top of my cabinets. This is going to give you a little bit more material to work with when you go to mount your crown. If you noticed a few seconds ago, I quote unquote dry fitted my face frame. I just like to set it on there to make sure everything's lined up perfectly before I add my glue. Now there's different ways you can attach your face frames. This is just my method. I like to glue them on and then use trim nails to tack them in place. This is gonna be very strong. I've never had a face frame fail or come off with this method. Now again, I'm not saying this is how you have to attach your face frames. This is just one option. And if you're doing some cabinets where you cannot put trim nail holes in it, then you're not going to be able to do this. So you could resort to pocket holes. You could use biscuits. You could also use, I think, what they call a lamello system. I don't have a lot of experience with that, but it's another way of attaching your face frames. I just got done using my damp rag to go ahead and wipe up any excess glue, and now we're going to use the wood filler to putty up our nail holes. I've used a few different wood putties at this point. I recently just started trying this brand. It's the Famo wood. This is a natural color and it works great with this wood and if you're gonna stain it or paint it. Although I would say if you are staining and you have a darker wood, they do have different color variations, so I would find something appropriate. Well, that about wraps up these box videos. I hope y'all got some good information out of this. I'm going to be doing a couple other videos that we're going to go a lot in depth on how we're making the shelves, the doors, and the drawers for this project. So I hope y'all check that out. And thanks again for watching.